Good evening, all. We welcome you to the evening session. For this session, we have our panelist, Mr. Debajyoti Roy. He's a managing director of NESL, and Shri Sandeep Garg. He's the executive director of IBBI. Just to inform you of the structure of what will happen, we have 20-minute paper presentations followed by 5 minutes for taking questions. Our first paper presentation for the day is Does Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Improve Credit Channels for Firms in the Indian Manufacturing Sector? It would be presented by Dr. Rajdeep Singh, Mr. Kanwaljit Singh, and Mr. Yadvinder Singh.
Good evening, everyone. So the topic of our research is, does Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code improve credit channels for Indian manufacturing sector? Although a lot of research has been done on this viewpoint that whether the credit channels or access to credit has increased for firms after the introduction of IBC or not. But we did not come across any paper which was very sector specific. In this research, we have tried to evaluate this, to examine this problem in the manufacturing sector of India. We have covered both listed and unlisted firms. So basically, as we all know that an effective credit ecosystem is very vital for a country's economic growth because it will help in the development of debt market as well, and it will increase investors' confidence. As we in the morning, sir was mentioning that because of IBC, there was improvement in ease of doing business index that was given by World Bank. Although now it has been discontinued, the sir was saying that they'll be trying to bring that new index that will be developed by IBBI and IMA. So we look forward to that. But now, since it has been discontinued, we need to understand whether in reality the access to credit for Indian manufacturing firms has improved or not, and if it has been improved, whether there was a transmission effect towards performance of these firms or not. So a sound bankruptcy process, it aims at balancing the rights of debtors and creditors. Now, earlier also we had various laws which were, protecting the creditors, but IBC has shifted the focus towards creditor in control model. Post the application of IBC, the recovery rates have reached 42.5%, which was earlier only 14.5%. Even now, there's also a need to improve this recovery rate further. And there's a huge decline in the time period which is taken for insolvency. Earlier, it was around average 4.3 years. In many countries, it's still 7 to 8 years. And now the focus is to finish this off in 180 days. But still, we are taking 340 days. The average days we are taking is 340 days. And a lot of delays due to litigation are the reasons for this delay. Then insolvency reforms strengthen creditors' rights and result in greater issuance of long-term debt. Many studies have even said that it also has a positive impact on short-term debt. Earlier in the previous session, there was a research that was examining whether it also has an impact on trade credit, which is one of the forms of financing for the firms. But our focus, the focus of this research, is on access to total credit. So the objective of the studies, our first objective is to examine the causal impact of IBC on demand and access to credit by distressed and non-distressed firms in the Indian manufacturing sector. Now, what are the distressed firms? As per our model, distressed firms are the ones in which average net worth for the company for the previous 4 years was less than 50%. The losses were more. Then to study the impact of IBC on the performance of the firms in the manufacturing sector, basically in this objective we'll try to see If credit channels have improved for the firms in the Indian manufacturing sector, then whether it is translating to enhanced performance or not. Because objective of IBBI and IBC, it is not just to go for recoveries and insolvency. The first and foremost objective of IBBI is to identify such distressed firms and try to revive them and save values for that firm, save the value of that firm. Now, what is the relevance of this study? It is important for policymakers to evaluate the effectiveness of the reforms brought over by the IBC law. And based on this examination of effectiveness, further amendments can be introduced and we can improve this law further. Then in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, when many of the firms have moved from non-distressed to distressed side, we want to, there's a need to see how these firms have survived. Then since firms closer to the point of distress are most likely to be influenced by the bankruptcy procedures, this research examines IBC's impact on financially distressed firms vis-a-vis non-distressed firms. Now, why we have chosen manufacturing sector? This is very important. More than 40%, about 40% of the admissions that were made in this IBC law, these firms are from manufacturing sector. This has been taken from the quarterly newsletter of IBBI itself, December 2021. And if you see the right-hand side pie chart, it shows that the number of resolutions that has been given, out of the total resolutions, 50% of the resolutions were of the firms which were from manufacturing sector. So half of the resolution processes are for manufacturing sector firms. So it itself speaks the need to conduct a detailed analysis, a detailed sectoral analysis of its impact on credit channels. Now, the research methodology which we have used, this data for this study is a panel data set. It is an unbalanced panel data set of manufacturing firms in India from the year 2011 to 21. It covers both listed and unlisted firms. This data has been taken from Capital Line database. For our initial analysis, there were 16,984 manufacturing firms. But we have only taken firms which were there in existence in our study period, that is 2011 to 21. That means if any firm which has been incorporated post 2011, that was excluded from the sample. Plus, if for any firms which has been wound up during this period, that was excluded. And the firms which had missing values, which had more than 20-30% of missing values, those firms have been excluded for better analysis. Then this description of variables. So this is a brief summary of the operationalization of our variables. So for credit channels, we have taken two proxies for this. The first one is the total credit to total assets, which measures the assets to credit or the leverage level. Then we have cost of debt, which is total interest expense by total debt. For performance measures, like we are also measuring the transmission effect of IBC, of enhanced credit assets on the performance itself. So the measure for performance is return on assets. We can even improvise our study by taking different proxies for all these variables. So IBC is a dummy variable. Distressed firms, it is also a dummy variable. So it takes value 1 if a firm in a year has accumulated losses equal to or exceeding 50% of its average net worth in the immediately preceding 4 financial years and 0 otherwise. Then we have some control variables which are firm specific variables. We have size, liquidity, age, collateral. The literature review says that all these variables, they have an important influence on the assets to credit for the firms. Now, empirical model. The methodology that we have used is differences in differences approach, also called DID methodology. Now, the first equation, it is for impact of IBC on credit channels of firms. So, for the first equation, my dependent variable is total debt to total assets. And here my main coefficient of interest is alpha 1, which is the coefficient for the interaction term. Similarly, for second equation, the dependent variable is changing and the right hand side of the equation is the same. Then, in order to analyze or examine if IBC has an impact on performance of firms, like the firms who have enhanced their credit assets, is it also translating to enhanced performance for them or not? So, return on assets is the dependent variable in this case, and our coefficient of interest is alpha 1, the coefficient of triple interaction term. So, this is the brief file for our data analysis. So, this first table, table 2, it shows the impact of IBC on credit channels, and as I told you, our main variable of interest was the first one. The main coefficient of interest is distress underscore IBC. And for our first equation also it was significant, and for second equation also it has come out to be significant. The second equation has an inverse relationship. That means with IBC the cost of debt has come down for these distressed firms vis-a-vis non-distressed firms. That means the distressed firms have more assets to finance now and are taking more loans. The prospective reason for this can be that now the creditors are feeling more safe to lend to them. But we also have to see whether this is translating to enhanced performance as well, because the loans which they are taking, the funds which they are taking, they ultimately have to repay that also. And this model was taken, like we have taken firm fixed effects and time fixed effect here. Then impact of IBC on performance through credit channels. Here, our main coefficient of interest is the first one, which is the triple interaction term. That means how distressed firms have enhanced performance in comparison to non-distressed firms post the introduction of IBC and with increased credit assets. So this also comes out to be significant at 5% level. For our control variables, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell that we have taken the first lag of these variables in order to address the simultaneity problem. Then table 3, in table 3, that was for equation 3, where we had return on assets as the dependent variable, but with our credit channel was total debt to total asset. This table 4, in this table 4, we have credit channel as the cost of borrowing. Then in order to validate our results, in order to test the robustness of the results, we have undertaken placebo test. That is, we assumed that instead of 2016, the IBC has been introduced in 2013. So for the same data set, for the same number of firms, earlier the period was 2011 to 20 and IBC was introduced in 2016. Now we are assuming that IBC has been introduced in 2013. Why we do so is to check whether our results are robust or not. And if the coefficient of these, in the double interaction term and the triple interaction term, it comes out to be insignificant, then it supports our results that IBC has had a positive influence on increased credit assets and has led to decreased cost of borrowing for the firms, for the non-distressed firms for distressed firms vis-a-vis non-distressed firms. So this table 5, 6, 7, this is for results for placebo test. and the coefficients in these three tables, they were insignificant, which supports that IBC has had a positive impact on increased credit channels, and these results are not due to any other changes in the economy. So the findings of the study highlight that IBC has improved investor confidence, and now the creditors feel more safe to even lend to distressed firms. And if distressed firms get this enhanced access to finance on time, they can be saved from going into bankruptcy, and they can be saved, their value can be saved, and the firms which are not able to do well, they need to be punished. So this IBC is a framework for constructive destruction. In order to free the resources which have been committed to these distressed firms, the firms which do not have any chance of revival, they have to be wiped out from the market so as to enhance efficiencies. Then IBC has brought in the necessary behavioral change required in the promoters as well, but there still needs to be there still needs to be more streamlining in the admission process. As the latest statement made by Minister of State for Corporate Affairs in the Parliament was that in NCLT more than 13,000 firms, the cases for admission are pending in NCLT for more than 13,000 firms. Then there is an urgent need to create a remote litigation structure to expedite this process of constructive destruction. What do we mean by remote litigation is that we need to differentiate between, some policies should be introduced which differentiate between major litigations and minor litigations, so that the working of the courts can be streamlined and they can focus more on major litigations rather than minor litigations. Then central repository of information can also be introduced so as to address the issue of non-cooperation by the promoters. So there is a plan to bring out a central repository of information which will have all the information of which promoter has taken how much loan and from which source, and whether they have repaid the earlier loans on time or not. Then if we also introduce mediation and conciliation mechanisms under the code, then a lot of legal work can be, that time wasted in legal formalities can be reduced, and the firms will settle outside IBC only. Then corporate debt market may be developed to reduce reliance on bank loans. And with IBC, as the credit channels are improving, the creditors are more lending to these distressed firms. There's also a need to develop the debt market like it's in the developed world also. Then the debt exchanges may be explored, where financial creditors may be permitted to trade debt on their books on a transparent platform. So with this, it will allow them to offload risk at earlier stages when they have earlier signs of distress. So in this paper, we have employed DID methodology and found that post-IBC, the credit channels and performance of distressed firms improved more as compared to non-distressed firms. That is all from our side. Thank you.
You mentioned something about automation of loan contracts. While I do agree with that, and our company NESL is providing that, but how do you conclude from the study about this requirement of automation of loan contracts?
This is not a direct conclusion from this study. Actually, we have our study shows that IBC Act is relevant, but now there needs to bring in more improvements in IBC. So this is one of the methods by which IBC can be improved.
Differences approach, right? Now, there could be ex-ante differences between the firms because you have a treatment and control group. So how do you know that? Because I don't think there is a matching propensity score matching that's been undertaken to understand pre-existing differences. Would that be something that you would
I have taken
consider?
firm fixed effects in my empirical model. So that takes care of
So,
that.
okay, so then you wouldn't sort of, but how would you still
Yeah,
know the parallel?
that parallel trend assumption, if placebo test results are insignificant, it shows that parallel test assumption is,
Okay, so you've taken
valid.
the fixed effects.
Yeah, I have taken firm
Instead.
fixed effects and time fixed effects. I
Okay,
have not taken industry into time fixed effects because I'm only taking for one sector, that is manufacturing sector.
right.
Yeah.
What I found was that most of the implications are not following from the results or findings of your research. Can you point out any particular area in which findings of your research are clearly can be used?
So my findings are pointing that IBC has helped these distressed firms in assessing more finance. Now, this enhanced assess can be increased by these measures which I have mentioned in the implications, that we need to develop our debt markets as well. We need to have more robust systems, like automation of the loan contracts should be there. So these implications are not a direct implication from the research, but the research, it says that IBC is helping the distressed firms to improve their performance by getting more finance on time. Now, that time period within which they can get that finance, we need to shorten that time period so that their value can be saved on time.
I
Yeah, for those countries it's less.
It's not IBC. He said before IBC. He said before.
I
IBC.
said before IBC it's 4.6 years.
But I have few questions here. Yeah. One is that I doubt your data regarding the recovery, 42.5.
So that was from Economic Survey 2020.
2020, no? So if today's recovery.
2020, yeah.
So if you see, so that's slightly outdated, because if
Now
you look at today's data, will be less than 30%. That is why. Yeah.
Uh, s-
Second,
Yeah, so that data is in today's newsletter, which has been
so
released
that
today. Yeah.
your data should be more updated.
Okay.
Do the research.
Yes,
It should be based on 22 March, not.
Right.
Second thing, duration also is somewhere around 470 days, not 340 days, as you said. Duration of CRP average is 470 days as per IBBI data.
Okay.
Third, whatever you say that the stress firms are getting more loans, it is not reflected in the by empirical data on the ground. If you look at the banking sector growth of credit, still last year was around 8 to 9%, previous year was 6%, and which mainly is growing in the retail, not in manufacturing. Okay,
So-
so,
so-
empirical data doesn't show really what your survey is showing.
So
Empirical-
which report are you talking
Every
from?
report you see, RBI report or even economic survey, the growth
But-
of credit in the country
Yeah.
is not more than 9% in last year, 31st March 22. In previous year, it was not more than 6 to 7%. And this includes retail credit, which is growing by 14 to 20%. Retail means individual credit or housing loan. Manufacturing credit is actually going down because of IBC, because of many recoveries, but not much credit.
Post
SR
IBC you are
Steel-
talking
SR
about?
Steel reduced the bank credit by 42,000 crore recovery. Bank have not been able to match that with further loans of that size. That is what I'm coming. So your credit is actually reducing. Then coming to your point of like.
So if you can mention me the exact report, like I can study that and I'll
we can
correct it if
share
it's.
later,
wrong.
yeah. Then your third observation is regarding the cost of credit for distressed fund, distressed asset. I think there also it will not be matched by the empirical data. Why?
So basically, that empirical data which you might be talking about, that is on individual level. Here I am taking comparison. We are comparing between distressed and non-distressed.
I am talking about distress only. I doing distress asset.
Okay.
So what I am telling is that this cost may be going down because of haircuts, not exactly because of more credit. See, when a resolution plan comes, banks or COC takes a haircut. So the 100 rupee loan becomes 30 rupees or 40 rupees.
Right.
The next year when the unit is revived, the cost of credit is on 30 rupees. So 70 rupees is written off.
Okay.
So you have to look into that. This is not because of more credit or better terms. This is because of haircut, the cost is coming down.
Okay.
That maybe you have to keep in. And then another reason, corporate credit growth is still not happening. And distressed credit, since morning, people have been saying that interim finance is not available. You are saying credit is available to the stress fund. But minimum the stress asset fund can get is the interim finance.
So there's a difference when they are mentioning it, because they are mentioning it at an aggregate level. What I am
After admission into CRP, we are saying that when company fall into stress, that is a zone of insolvency. Before admission into IBC, but before admission into IBC, but company is distressed. They are talking.
They are getting more credit. You want to
after
say.
Admission into CRP, that interim finance is not available.
because
Whatever.
post IBC now the creditors feel more safe
No.
to lend to even
So,
these firms.
Since, because coming from a banker, I deal in more than 1,000 cases of IBC.
No, right, sir.
So I can give you the real data, like my experience.
Okay.
Maybe you are right. That the credit available to distressed firms is still difficult, because even credit available to normal firms is difficult at this stage.
Okay.
Bankers are in a stage where they are risk averse as of now. Okay. So this credit may be like, reason may be that funding of resolution plan, which is also very rare. Like out of 480 resolutions happened under IBC, I don't think more than 10 or 15 resolution plans have been funded by banks. Maybe maximum 15. Like Ruchi Soya is one big example, where the plan of Patanjali was funded by the banks. So there also your empirical data doesn't match with my data.
Okay.
I don't see many funding of resolution plans also. So these are some of my suggestions.
I'll take a suggestion, sir, and
Mm,
incorporate.
no, one observation
Two
I have,
things. May-
actually, the data which is you have done is basically not just IBC related firms, because you've done the stress by way of net worth.
Yeah, sir.
So it is possible that these firms are able to reduce the debt based on some kind of settlements with the creditors because of the fear of IBC.
Yes,
So-
sir.
so that is a possibility.
That also might have happened here
Yeah.
for some
So-
of the firms.
So that is a possibility.
Yeah, that is a
Because
possibility.
we have these distressed firms are not just the IBC firms. These are a larger sample, and based on the selection by way of net worth.
And sir,
So
these
they could have reduced this debt by way of some kind of settlement, and also by way of cost maybe could have gotten some additional collateral, again because of the fear of the IBC, fear of losing control. So
Right.
that is a possibility.
Right, sir.
But I think there you need to do some more research.
Okay, sir. We'll do it.
Two things. Two things I liked about your
Uh,
presentation
yes.
here. One is of the remote litigation you suggested,
Yes, sir.
because there are many compliances where a formal order is required from NCLT by the RP and liquidator. If such applications are segregated, where main litigation could be focused for adjudication. So that is a very good suggestion you suggested. Very important thing one you suggested is of alternate dispute resolution mechanism, which is not there in IBC. But under the Companies Act section 442, there is a mechanism of mediation is provided. And we have filed an application. But since this section of Companies Act is not included in IBC, the adjudicating authority is not applying that section. So your suggestion is very good of alternate dispute mechanism. If that section is included under IBC, then many, before the admission, that mediation process of the Companies Act could be applicable under IBC. So there is a very good suggestion and a very important aspect to avoid the litigation process.
I'm
Thank
sure,
you.
sir, the people from IBBI will be noting this. Thank you.
Sorry to cut that short, but we are constrained with time. The second and the final presentation for today's session is, the topic is the effect of bankruptcy reform on default risk of firms, evidence from India. It would be presented by Dr. Aishwarya Krishna and Dr. Jayadevan.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So my topic for the day is effect of bankruptcy reform on default risk of firms, evidence from India. In the last 10 years, about 90 countries have done some sort of bankruptcy reform. And India is also one among them. So in 2016, as we have all been discussing from morning, IBC came into being. Now, the research question that we are asking in this paper is that what has been the impact of this legal reform on the economic distress of a firm? Okay? So that is the first question. And if it has increased, then what might be the reasons for that? If it has decreased, then what could be the reasons for that? So these are the two research questions that we are going to address in this paper. So let me just give you a background to how we came up to these questions. So in the year 2019, we got in the year 2020, we got MCA 21 data, and this was for all the firms starting from 2011 to 2020. So that's about 12 lakh firms. And then we sort of, decreased the number of firms to about 9 lakh based on the asset size. So we took all those firms with asset size greater than 1 crore. And then this study came as, a repercussion of that study. So where we did the bankruptcy prediction of all those firms, listed and unlisted, using machine learning models. Now, coming to the uniqueness of this study. So why is this study important? What is so unique about this study? So basically, effective credit rights improvement has majorly been studied for listed firms. Okay, and in the case of India, Bose, Philomeni, and Malik 2021 does it. And then there is another paper by Joes 2020. Those people also study for listed firms. And then till now, only developed markets were studied. And of course, we do have a few papers who are studying emerging markets as well. And then the studies majorly concentrate on variables from financial statements, to measure default risk. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to compare between listed firms and unlisted firms. Because of the enormity of the data that we possess, this study becomes extremely important. We are looking at, small firms as well, right? And then it is India focused, and we are also adding some governance variables. Now, what could be the governance variables that we are adding? For example, percentage increase in median remuneration of the directors of a firm. That's a governance variable. Then we are adding how many board meetings is a person, is a director attending. So the attendance of the director for all the board meetings. So that's another governance variable that we are adding. And various other governance variables, especially important 3 auditor level variables also we have added, thanks to the MCA 21 database. All right, so the motivation, why are we doing this? Mainly look at the ratio of downgrades to upgrades. This is a very important economic distress metric, right? So we collected this data from CMIE Provis, wherein we have the ratings of all the rating agencies like CRISIL, CARE, etc., right? So we have taken all those downgrades to upgrades ratio, and we have plotted here, and you can see that this has sort of increased. And then one good thing is that post-IBC, our score, the World Bank score for resolving insolvency has kind of increased. The red line that you see over here is for India. The green line is China, and there the blue and the purple line is for US and Japan. Right, so this comes from the World Bank data. Now, coming to the literature, so listed, unlisted, mainly all these firms, all the studies that we have kind of seen look at listed firms. Now, for example, Brazil, when it introduced its credit reform, that was in 2005, they found that greater the credit rights, lower would be the cost of debt. And then the Italy case, right? The Italy case, 2016 paper by Rodano. So they have stated that there is increase in credit demand. The interest rate has also increased after the reorganization reform, but the liquidation reform does not give the same result, right? And then the UK result, increased costs for borrowing, for proceedings. Now, all these studies, basically indicate that there is an increase in credit. Now, that becomes sort of an income side argument, okay? Now, India-specific studies. Now, let us look at some studies like the Visaria 2009 paper that looks at DRTs, and they say that there has been a positive effect on the probability of repayment. So that would be the probability of repayment has increased. And then there is another Vaughan, Lilienfeld, Mukherjee, and Visaria 2012. So increase in interest rates they are finding. WIG 2013, right? So they look at the Sarfazi Act, reduction in secured debt they found, right? And all these papers have, different sort of, results that they find. Now, coming to the hypotheses development. So what are we doing basically? We have adopted for the first research question that we are asking, what happens to the distress risk of firms post-IBC? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Now, what is distress risk? That is another question that we have to address. So we measure distress risk by the logistic regression framework, and we have thrown in all sorts of variables into the equation, governance, be it geographical variables, so we have added even state level variables into this measure. So the distress IT, the left-hand side is basically taking 1, 0. So if it is a distressed firm, it takes 1. If it's a non-distressed firm, it takes 0. Now, how do we measure the 1 and the 0? That is basically the economic default, the rating default that all these firms are getting from the rating agencies. So if a rating agency gives a default rating, then it takes the value of 1. And more importantly, it's not only the rating agencies that we are looking at, so we have also integrated the TransUnion CIBIL database into our study. So the distress also takes 1 if you are a willful defaulter, okay? So we have basically rating default and willful default in the measure of distress risk. Then to look at why this has it happened because the debt structure has increased or decreased? So we also look at the IBC, how it has affected the leverage, and then we look at how it has affected the cost of borrowing. So again, as the previous presentation also carried out a similar sort of study wherein they also look at the DID framework. Even I have also looked at the DID framework to test hypothesis 2 and hypothesis 3. But the first one is our major result, whether default risk has come down. Okay, so let's just look at the data set once before we go to the results. So what all have we integrated here? So starting from 2011 to 2020, we have about 5 types of filings in MCA, okay? So one is XBRL, another is Ind AS, another is AOC 4, 2018 to 20. The data structure is totally different when compared to AOC 4 of 2015 to 17. And then the 23 ACA and 23 AC starting from 2011 to 14. So this entire exercise of aggregating all the forms, the data of all the forms into one single data set is a big exercise because the variable names are different. So we had to do a lot of data crunching there. And then, of course, we have also integrated the market-related data. So if you are a listed firm, then obviously you have stock prices, you have volume traded. So all these data variables are also coming into picture if there is a listed firm. And then the rating defaults and of course the willful defaults. So these are also being aggregated into the data set. All right, so let's just look at the basic summary statistics. We have about 10,422 firm years, listed firm years, okay? And this is of course after cleaning. In fact, for many firms, the balance sheet was not the balance sheet, it was not balancing, right? The A is equal to L plus E equation was not balancing for many firms. And then for a lot of firms, simple audit of fees was negatively reported. So we had to do a lot of data cleaning to get it to this level. And as you can see, for listed firms, we have the default rates. 2012, it's about 4.12%. As it goes on, the next highest that we are seeing is in 2016. And then, of course, it's coming down later. And then for the unlisted firms, we don't see very high default rates because the rating agencies and TransUnion CIBIL database are not following these unlisted firms. So these agencies are following just the listed firms, but that's why we are getting very few defaulted firms. But the good part is that we still have 7,637 defaults. That is exclusive default firms, okay? So the first time that you're defaulting, that is taken as your economic default. And then we have about 337 defaults in the listed category. So we have a good number. 7,600 is a good number to do this entire logistic regression. Okay, just to, so I have kind of merged all these databases, but why leave IBBI data? So let's do that as well, right? So let me just give you a sort of view about what happens if I get in IBBI data into the picture. Out of 443 CIRP filings that we have, only 205 have matched with our MCA data. This could probably because of the asset size filter that we have put in. And then the CIBIL plus IBBI. So we have merged TransUnion CIBIL database plus IBBI. So there as well, out of about 106 willful defaulters from 2016 to 20, we just get one firm that matches with IBBI data. Then ratings plus IBBI, we have 142 CIRP firms that are matching with the ratings data, out of which 110 have a default rating. So that's a good thing. So 110 default ratings out of 142 CIRP firms. And rest of the firms, believe it or not, there are about 4 or 5 firms which have a AAA rating and a CIRP filing. A4 rating, A3 rating, and a CIRP filing. So that was very shocking when I did this sort of merger. Then rating upgrades and downgrades. Out of 138 firms, that is the CIRP firms, who had rating downgrades or upgrades, we observed that 108 firms had a reaffirmation, and just 18 were downgraded. So this is the entire big picture when we get in IBBI data into the picture. So, okay, very quickly, the univariate tests. We did the pre-IBC and post-IBC univariate tests, and we see that long-term leverage has actually come down post-IBC. So the previous study that we saw, the previous paper, it showed that the leverage has increased, right? So the short-term leverage has also seen a decrease. Cost of credit, well, that has also decreased. But cost of credit, it gets ruled out when we do the DID framework. Okay, the tangibility of the firms has also come down. And very importantly, the probability of default, right? The probability of default has seen a very good decrease post IBC. So that we are going to test it in a multivariate framework. Okay, so the multivariate framework shows very clearly that the default risk has come down post IBC. IBC takes the value of 1 if it's more than 2016. So the year is more than 2016. So we see that in all the 3 models where we include state variables and when we include governance variables, I have not shown those results here just due to the paucity of time. So the default risk has reduced post IBC by 0.22% for the listed firms. And for the basic model, we use Altman's 1968 variables. And of course, this is the DID framework. I'll not explain the equation there, but we find that default into IBC, which is our main DID variable, showing a negative coefficient, which means that post IBC, the debt structure, that is the leverage, has come down. And look at the probability of default. So this is something that we estimated using logistic regression. And this is the time series average of all the firms, and this has clearly come down even post IBC. And for unlisted firms, again, the long-term leverage is showing a negative effect post IBC for unlisted firms. So this is the data which has about 8 lakh firms, okay? So very quickly, let me just, so this is the logistic regression. Again, here the probability of default or the default risk of these firms have come down post IBC. Now, here as well, DID framework for unlisted firms. Again, default variable is showing, the default into IBC. So that variable is again showing positive for the unlisted firms. And very interestingly, the cost of borrowings is not showing significant effect at all for listed and for unlisted firms. So there has been no effect on cost of borrowing for listed as well as unlisted firms. So that is the major conclusion that we are drawing. And of course, for the question whether we have done the matching, propensity score matching, well, we didn't do the propensity score matching, but we have matched it based on the asset size and the industry, following Altman again, and we found that the results are robust to that as well. So just to conclude, for the listed firms, using logistic regression framework, we find that the default risk has actually reduced post IBC. So we measured the default risk using logistic regression. Expansion of creditor rights has decreased corporate borrowings of firms that have a default rating or is a willful defaulter. And then defaulted firms have a 0.8% higher cost of borrowings when compared to the non-defaulted firms. No effect of IBC is observed. So in both the cases, listed and unlisted, IBC is not showing any significant effect on the cost of borrowings. Default risk, again for unlisted firms, very similar results. Default risk has reduced post IBC. In the basic model just uses the financial statement information. Of course, when we put in the governance variables as well, governance variables also auditor level variables. So all these variables, even if we put that, the default risk is on a decreasing trend. And of course, IBC has decreased the corporate borrowing of unlisted firms also. And default firms have had a higher cost of borrowings when compared to the non-default firms, but effect of IBC is not observed. So that's it. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
You use some data of willful default.
Yes, sir.
So what is the source for that?
TransUnion CIBIL database.
Willful default?
Yes. So we have taken all those willful defaulters above 1 crore. We didn't take the 25 lakh above because our data entirely we are taking only 1 crore above asset size.
Okay. Now
We
you've
scraped
also
it from the website.
you've also shown that this probability of default has come down.
Yes.
Could it also be that, as you see, generally banks and financial institutions have been more circumspect on corporate lending. So could it be because of that?
It could be. I don't know how to control for it.
Yeah.
I,
So it could be because of that.
it could be
If you
because of
generally
that.
see, this aversion to lending is there,
Right. Hmm.
and most of the credit growth is on the retail side. So that could be one factor
Yeah.
for.
So in another presentation I attended, they were talking about a methodology to, control for that as well.
Yeah,
Something
so you can
called
think of
parallel
that
trending.
as a
I'll try
further
that out
research
as well.
project.
Yeah.
And finally, this cost of borrowing you are showing decline, but if you see, have
Cost
you?
of borrowing,
Yeah,
post
But,
IBC, no effect.
yeah, but you showed some decline in trade, isn't it? Cost of borrowing.
No, probability of default has come down, but cost of borrowing post IBC, I don't find any effect for listed and for unlisted firms.
Okay, fine then. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Asoria. Yeah, this side. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm thinking back. So thank you for this nice presentation. So I'm Sumit. I'm a PhD student here at IMA.
Okay.
I don't work in this area, so I have a clarificatory question to you.
Okay.
I mean, so basically you are saying that IBC impacts the, that the default risk, right? But I didn't get the mechanism through which the IBC can impact the default risk, because default risk will be governed by economic factors, right? Like the competition in the industry, or if the economy as a whole is doing bad, or industry as a whole is doing bad. So
Yeah,
I could not.
Actually, the same comment we got from the CEA when we presented these results to the former CEA rather, to Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam. He said, why have you not controlled for macro factors? You should have controlled for interest rates at the macro level. You should have controlled for the GDP growth rate. So we did that. So we found that the results are the same. So we have controlled for macro factors. And in fact, when we added interest rates as one of the control variables, that's when the cost of debt disappeared. The result on the cost of debt, till then, I was getting it to be coming down post IBC. But as soon as I added interest rate as a control variable, the effect sort of disappeared.
Can I give an explanation for that?
Yes, sir, sure.
So basically what I see is that the law will not have any impact on the economic factors. See, inflation, the interest rates,
Right.
IBC will not have any impact on that. What IBC as an economic law has impact in the behavior of the borrowers. So here comes your willful default. Okay, less number of borrowers are defaulting willfully now. That may be the reason the default risk has come down, not because of any economic factors. Because the people are fearing default, because the assets will be taken away by the creditors. They lose control. That may be the reason why your default risk is coming down. Second aspect I would like to say is that, have you also examined the cascading effect of defaults? Because once a company defaults, then their vendors, their suppliers, it defaults to others also, then they further default to their vendors. There is a cascading effect on the economy, understand?
That's a very good point, sir.
Yeah.
Because what I have done,
Mhm.
I have taken, so once a company defaults,
Mhm.
I took all the related parties of that company.
Yeah.
And then I sort of did a testing whether the other company that is a related party also defaults. And I found that there is
Yes.
a very...
Actually, we see in the normal life, because
Yeah.
as a banker, I see a lot of time.
Yeah.
Okay, if like NHI defaults on a EPC company, then that EPC company may be defaulting on 15 other vendors, and they are all our borrowers. So 16 borrowers default because one company has defaulted. So that also should be brought into the study.
MCA didn't give us the related parties of all these firms, so we had to take it from Proves.
And as regard these unlisted firms, these include the partnerships and proprietorship
Yes,
firms.
absolutely, everything. But asset size greater than 1 crore.
But regarding your suggestion that the cost of credit has not come down, I think there will be a lag. So it will not come down immediately, because there is a change of behavior now. So if you today you see less probability of default, then that premium for default will go down gradually. So maybe after 3-4 years you'll see that, not today. That is my opinion. Thank you. Good presentation.
It's a MC database, it should be only for corporates, right? It should not cover partnership firms, unless the LLPs.
Yes, sir, we have LLP firms,
Only LLPs, not unregistered partnership firms.
not unregistered,
Yeah.
registered, that have a CIN.
Yeah, so only LLPs, basically LLPs and companies.
So you linked all the variables among the different reports. Or, oh, that's a very commendable effort. Yeah.
We got the data in 2020. We have about
Hello, Aishwarya. Yeah, there is one last question from me. Actually, there is a suggestion from my side. Perhaps you have already covered it, but it is not actually very explicit in your presentation, that you are comparing the listed firm and unlisted firms on various parameters, cost of borrowing and default risk. And this is your uniqueness to study. But you have actually not suggested that what motivated you to do this comparison. Just because you have access to this database, MCA, this large repository, is it that the motivation to do the this study, or if there is some your personal motivation to do that, then it has to come into picture. So that's
sure.
I mean, so that
basically
will
it was-
actually add to your study. That's what
Okay.
I suggest.
Yeah. So I mean, the answer to that question, first I studied the bankruptcy prediction for US firms. So that's where it all began. Then now it's, I'm concentrating on Indian firms. Correct. So we found a basic literature gap here. So till now, Sarfazi Act was studied, DRTs were studied. There was no explicit study for unlisted firms on IBC. That's one motivation that I would suggest I have.
Your motivation will help to understand what is the managerial implications to others.
Okay.
Otherwise just because academic gap is there doesn't mean that it will translate to something.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to the presentations and giving your valuable comments. Tea would be served outside, following which there is a data-driven insolvency research workshop which would be held at the same auditorium.